the news reporting division of the BBC, there is a well-identified and well-known problem. This isn't news. This is something that Tim Davie and I were talking about when I was Secretary of State. It's something that's been discussed since by senior members and senior executives at the BBC. They have a very serious problem.
The Labour minister we spoke to earlier this morning was incredibly supportive of the BBC, despite the resignations of the Director General and the CEO of BBC News. Louise Sander-Jones told us she did trust the BBC and pointed to all the good work it did. But should the government be so supportive at this crucial time when a new DG needs to be hired and the BBC is preparing for a new charter? Nadine Dorries is a former Conservative Culture Secretary. She's now supporting Reform UK, and we can speak to her now. Nadine, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Did these two have to resign, do you think?
Oh, yeah, they had to, yeah. I think it's interesting how Tim Davie has been pointedly uncritical of Deborah Turnus, but yeah, they both had to go.
Why do you think it is? Because the argument, I suppose, would be that Tim Davie wasn't responsible for any of these specific issues that are at stake. Is he responsible for something greater than that?
Well, the buck has to stop somewhere, doesn't it? It usually stops at the desk of the person who's responsible for whichever department or organisation has slipped up. So I suppose as Director General, he felt he had no choice but to resign.
Is this a problem about the Trump footage in particular, or something broader in your view, Nadine?
No, I think it's much deeper and much broader. It's not just the Trump. I mean, Trump has been the catalyst. It's been the straw that has been the final straw, and it's a massive issue. It's probably one of the most serious, I think, any broadcaster, including yourselves, who would doctor a speech in that way and put it out in such a way to tell a completely different story from the one which actually took place, should be both held to account and be highly ashamed and embarrassed about what they've done. But there have been so many things. If you want to cast your memory back to, Martin Bashir, Princess Diana, the producer, the senior executive who had to resign over a doctored a film that was put out about something the Queen said, Jewish children on a school bus in London. There have been so many instances, one after the other, with the recent issues also, which have happened, that it got to a point where how many more breaches of impartiality and fair reporting could the BBC continue to get away with? And I think finally the Trump speech was it. That was it. It's broken the system, and I think it's actually brought into question many things. Not only the lack of impartiality within the BBC, but also what does the future of the BBC now look like moving forward? And I don't think it continue as it is, this huge monolithic organisation. I think it's been proven that it's impossible when an organisation is so huge and has such an entrenched cultural kind of way of behaving, that it's impossible to continue in this way.
Well, let's talk about the future in a moment, but do you believe that there is a sort of groupthink at the BBC? It's too left-wing. What are you saying is the issue? I mean, it employs thousands and thousands of people. It produces all sorts of content across all sorts of platforms in all sorts of areas, much of which is beloved by many people. Is there a cultural thing that you see where the people there push a specific agenda?
Well, I think you've conflated the elements of education, drama, entertainment with news reporting. And I think in the news reporting division of the BBC, there is a well-identified and well-known problem. This isn't news. This is something that Tim Davie and I were talking about when I was Secretary of State. It's something that's been discussed since by senior members and senior executives at the BBC. They have a very serious problem. A lot of it's to do with central news reporting and how anything which comes out of the BBC in terms of news and current affair content goes through certain centralised filters. That's part of the problem. But it's news specifically. The BBC does great work in drama and entertainment. We all know that. And it used to be a global beacon across the world for news reporting too. But it no longer is. I think as a result of what's happened, the reputation of the BBC has now been irreparably damaged. It's proven that this centralised news reporting function doesn't work, and that the people who run that element of the BBC have become, as you say, a groupthink entity in its own right. And that's a serious problem. It means that the BBC news function really shouldn't and cannot continue in the way that it is.
So what should happen to it? Because it's still a massive news source for very many people. It has more resource than almost any other news organisation I can think of. What should happen to it?
Yeah, and that's probably a longer discussion than we've got time for today, Stig. But I think that, what needs to happen in news is it needs to be stripped back to its core function, which was to report the news without bias and without opinion, just to report in an impartial and fair way, just to report the news. I mean, I'm sure you're probably not old enough to remember this, but back in the day of newscasters like Reginald Bosanquet and others, they used to tell the news, but you had no idea what their opinion was. They were not national personalities. They weren't a story within themselves. They weren't, for many reasons, many of them were just, they came to work, they told the news as it was. It was unfiltered. It wasn't doctored. It wasn't corrupted. It didn't have a bias over it.
But there
weren't various committees that it had to go through to approve it first.
Is that because the world has changed, though, Nadine Dorries? I mean,
of course the world has changed.
Because back in the day, there was a respect for authority. There was this view that there was one set of facts that could be trusted. And actually, the world we live in, social media, the sort of post-truth age, means that actually everything is much more contentious, and therefore the notion of straightforward reporting of news may be an impossibility now, because it's very hard to determine what is a straightforward fact and what is a contentious issue.
Well, I think you manage it. So I think there's, there is proof that it can be done. And you're right, the news, there is various context, because we have so much information now, particularly in this digital age. But, you manage it. What you're saying is it will be impossible for any news organisation. It's not just about the BBC. Impossible for any news organisation to tell the truth and the facts as they are. And I'm afraid I don't buy that. I buy that if you take away the bias, take away the filters, if you can find truly apolitical people to report the news, then you can report the facts as they are. You can report, two elements, and this happens all the time. You can report, I do it, I'll be doing it today when I write my column for the Daily Mail. I'll do it. I'll have to provide the context to what I write, and I'll have to provide an
But you won't be
I
mean, we all know this. If I had to think of a more partial thing in existence than a Daily Mail column, I'd struggle, I think. Is a Daily Mail column not the very
Well, you really don't read mine then, do you?
The acme of it partiality. Come on, it's got some welly to it, it's got a worldview. That's the whole point of it, isn't it?
So it's, in terms of its news reporting, the Daily Mail, I'm a columnist. I don't report the news in the Daily Mail or the Mail on Sunday. But if you look at the way the news is reported, the Daily Mail will tell the story that maybe other newspapers such as The Guardian and The Mirror don't tell. Of course, it's always been the case that with newspapers, they have a point of view. A point of view, yeah. And it will tell the story from that point of view. But all of them are held to a certain standard of reporting and have to comply. This is the whole reason why we had the Leveson
but that's true of the BBC. I mean, the BBC has tighter regulation than newspapers do. I mean, the BBC has this regulation, and I suppose its defenders would say, as a result of it, it generally gets most things correct.
Yeah, nobody is calling for the heads of the Daily Mail, though. No one at the Daily Mail has ever had to resign. It's happened a number of times at the BBC. In fact, the executive, as I said, whose name escapes me now, who doctored the Queen video, he had to resign. It's happened a number of times at the BBC. And you now have the two most senior executives at the BBC who've had to resign, not for the first time. It's, the BBC has been caught out time and time again for misreporting news and for doctoring and corrupting the news. That's the difference between the news and the standard of newspapers, who I think are possibly held to a higher standard. It's by the regulatory bodies and others than maybe broadcasters are. But that's just my personal opinion. Just
finally, is the licence fee sustainable? When you looked at this very carefully when you were Culture Secretary, there's another charter renewal coming. You wouldn't invent the licence fee if you were inventing the BBC now, but it's very hard for people to come up with other options necessarily. Do you think its time has come, though?
Yeah, so a regressive tax which criminalises people who don't pay it for watching a television is so far outdated. It defies explanation. the BBC licence fee, that was my issue. I made a statement very clearly when I was Secretary of State that it would be the last. The Royal Charter is coming up for renewal in 2027. I made a statement in 2022 that when 27 came, there would be no more licence fee. We do live in this day where people have a lot of choice. 500,000 people fewer bought the BBC licence fee last year. 500,000 people the year before, I believe, did the same thing. The number of people who are buying the licence fee is dwindling at a huge rate.
Do you pay for it? Do you still pay for it, Nadine?
Sorry?
Do you still pay for it, the licence fee?
I do, because I'm a law-abiding citizen, but I do not believe that I should be paying for a licence fee to watch my television.
Nadine Dorries, interesting stuff from you as ever. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
She is the former Conservative Culture Secretary, now supporting Reform UK.